Hello, everyone. My name is Neville Smith. I'm the Director of Education for Eve University. I want to thank you all for joining today. This is one of a series of guest question and answer and interview sessions that we do with prominent personalities in Eve Online. We always record these and post these to our recorded class library on the Eve University Wiki, and this will be no exception. This afternoon, our guest is Ali Aras, who is a member of the Council of Stellar Management, also a candidate for the next iteration, the 9th iteration of the CSM, and also a well-known stealth bomber pilot, an occasional teacher of Eve University students, and generally an all-around well-known celebrity in Eve Online. So, Ali, thank you for joining us today. We very much appreciate it. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here again. I think I spoke a little over a year ago, back when I first got elected, or when I was first campaigning, but it's been a while.
That is right. And unfortunately, that recording got lost to the sands of time, so I'm going to be a lot more careful about this and post this later today, so we won't lose the art for the archives. I do want to start off first for those of you who, those in our audience who are not familiar with you. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got first engaged in Eve Online and how long you've been with the game? A little bit on your background.
So I've been playing for almost 2 years now. I actually originally started when a friend of mine and I were talking about quitting WoW. We came to Eve. We sort of tooled around in Highsec for a little bit. The friend got suicide ganked, and we both quit because we were distressed by being PvP'd in a safe system. Made a couple more attempts to play, never really got into the mission running and mining thing, and had given it up for lost until a real-life friend of mine messaged me and said, hey, another friend of ours is starting up an EVE Online Corp, and he's going to teach us how to PvP. That corp was Valkyries of Night. I joined. I got my first kill very shortly afterwards. I learned how to do...
Ali Aras, you cut out?
Yep, sorry. Someone was walking in the room. I learned how to do frigate PvP and eventually larger than frigate PvP. Lived in Providence for about a year, and then relations between my alliance and Providence sort of soured in a way that was rather public and interesting. In the summer of last year, sort of roamed around, ended up moving to Nora Mercenary Group, where I've been exploring different aspects of EVE and having a whole bunch of fun. Along the way, I got elected to CSM 8 on a platform of newbie representation, and in particular, and representation for small groups in LowSec, a platform which I am reprising for CSM 9.
Excellent summary. You mentioned some interesting developments related to your prior alliance flying in Providence. In fact, Providence, the Provi block, was probably a substantial amount of the folks that voted for you last year. Do you foresee any trouble now that you've kind of moved into the Noir Mercenary Group? Do you expect to lose that support? Tell us a little bit about how you see that.
So there's a couple of layers to it. There's the in-game sense in that, relations were hostile. We fought a war. In the end of the war, we sort of hit a stalemate, negotiated a treaty, and the end thing is sound moved out. But that's sort of the politics stuff. I've always viewed the CSM as above that politics level, and so even though I moved out of Providence, I was still representing NRDS on the CSM. I was still supporting the things that I said that I'd support. So I think I would still be someone who would advance the things that Providence voters are interested in. I still like NRDS, and that's still something that I will continue to bring up when appropriate. But I don't know how many other people see it that way, and so I'm not really counting on Providence votes. I tried to set up like a town hall to talk to them, and that didn't really go anywhere. I'd still be happy to do it, and I might reach out again, just to talk about some of the specific things that went down. But it's, I do the things that I do in the game to have fun and to follow sort of my principles or whatever. That ended up leading to that particular fight, and I don't, I'm sad for the loss of support, and it certainly made a little bit more nervous going into it. But I think that I'll be okay. I'm still reaching out. I'm still trying to, reach people who maybe haven't heard of me or maybe haven't heard of the CSM, and get them interested in it, and get them interested in a candidate who both has a good track record and is still in that niche, which isn't really well filled all the time, of newbie interests and smaller gangs and smaller alliances.
Well, I have a number of questions coming up in the chat, and also that I'd like to ask you about the CSM. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about your experience and playstyle in EVE Online. You're currently flying with the Noir mercenary group. What regions are you flying in generally, and what kind of space do you typically like to fly in?
Well, we fly wherever we are paid to fly, pretty much. That's one of the more interesting facets of mercenary life. If you want sort of the most broad look at EVE PvP, it's a really great area to check out. So we just concluded 2 weeks of contracts that were in Highsec, doing Highsec war deck stuff, staged not that far from GDA. Flying in that environment. We had lived for a while in low-sec, so we've spent some time living there. And I've done a lot of work in nullsec as well, both smaller gang stuff and, in particular, Black Ops fleets and Black Ops dropping, which is a great way to, especially if the thing that you're interested in doing is attacking someone else's, sort of PvE infrastructure. Black Ops is a really great way to shut systems down and inflict some damage on the sort of line pilots of an enemy.
And you have taught stealth bomber classes to EVE University before, something we very much appreciate it. Do you still primarily fly stealth bombers, or what are you flying these days? Stealth bombers when I'm doing Black Ops work, but I've been doing a little bit of logistics in fleets, and I've gotten really into sort of solo. I'm trying to get into solo PvP. There's a long thing on Declarations of War, I want to say 70, where I kind of go through some of my recent losses. I've been flying a stabber, and whenever I can, trying to learn how to do the kiting thing in a way that'll get me some kills and avoid getting me killed. I've gotten better, but it's definitely you got to lose 100 fights before you finally win one. Rip Harteg on his blog, Jester's Trek, has implied or stated outright that the age of solo PvP and small gang PvP seems to be fading from EVE Online. Do you find that to be true?
Not at all. And in particular, if you're interested in going into factional warfare, that's where I've done a lot of my solo PvP. I have another character that I've flown with an Atron in factional warfare, and so far I haven't won a fight, but I've lost a lot of very instructive fights. And when I've been soloing around in my stabber, you find people who will undock, you find people who will try to blob you out. Maybe if you're talking about, I don't know if there ever has been a golden age where, you have 5-on-5 small gang versus small gang engagements. I don't know. I guess I don't know the health of sort of the PvP that I first started out with. When I first started leading fleets, it was gangs of 10 or so T1 cruisers. Sorry about that. It was gangs of 10 or so T1 cruisers. I don't know how that's doing, but I do know that flying around with just me or just a couple people, I've had no problems getting interesting engagements, trying to peel, tackle, and sillier ships away from a larger group and getting some damage in before we get completely blobbed out. It's the game that it is. I don't really see it dead.
How many characters do you maintain in EVE Online?
I've got a total of 4 right now. I've got Ali Aras, who's my main. I've got another character who I have to still hang out and fly with my Valkyries of Night and sound buddies. She also does some of my dropping, and I originally skilled her to be a Falcon alt, but since then she's sort of taken on a life of her own as a second PvP character. I have a jump freighter, black ops, bridging, sort of utility alt, and then I have another alt that I created to basically go through life as a newbie again. I wanted to see, I tell a lot of people, you can come in this game and you can do something interesting first month, and I wanted to make absolutely sure for myself that that's true. And it is. I've had a lot of fun on that character.
How many hours a week, on average, do you think you spend on EVE Online, both in-game and in out-of-game but EVE-related kinds of activities?
Yeah, you're getting into the sort of EVE offline thing there. Definitely over 10. Maybe edging up to 15 or 20 or so, and the vast majority of that is spent offline. I wish I could say that I logged in more. I wish I could say that I did stuff. I try and do something interesting at least once a week, both to keep my hand in and to keep it fun. But I do spend a lot of time on Skype, on forums, writing, tweeting, all that stuff that just goes with being an active CSM member.
And you are also active in social media. You post frequently on Twitter with the Tweet Fleet hashtag group, and also have your own blog. And of course, you also, when you started with CSM8, started your Space Hangouts. Tell us about how much time you spend in social media, and what kind of things have you gotten out of that kind of experience working with the EVE Online community?
A lot of what I've gotten out of it is a bunch of friends and contacts that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I've talked to a whole bunch of different people on Tweet Fleet and on Space Hangouts who I never would have met just flying my character around doing what I do, because, of course, the sort of one of the great and awful things of EVE Online is you can't do everything. It's just such a huge, deep game that you cannot do a single aspect of it. At least not, within a couple of years. So doing that has let me meet a whole bunch of new people, and that's fantastic. It's gotten me a broader perspective on the game, which I really, really value. And it's gotten me people who I can ask. I've been talking to, I talk to different people when something comes up on the CSM that I don't know 100%. It's really nice to be able to reach out to someone else and say, can you tell me everything that you know about your area of specialty?
So it's always good to be able to use that or rely on that as a bank of experts. I would imagine that would come in very handy with the work that you've been doing with CSM.
Yep, definitely. And it's also just fun. I mean, a lot of these people are cool people and good friends and nice, awesome to talk to. I've recently joined the sort of smartphone collective, so I can now check Tweet Fleet and stuff when I'm riding on the bus to work, and it's just nice.
Let's talk a little bit about CSM. And Nian asks a good question. We have a lot of new players here at EVE University, of course, who aren't familiar with the CSM. What does the CSM entail? What is it exactly, and what kind of influence do you have on CCP as a member of CSM?
I've joked to one of the other Unistas that it's a loud, occasionally angry blob of people. What it does is there's 14 CSMs. We all have a regular Skype channel with some subset of the EVE devs and smaller channels that are a lot more specialized in EVE. are a lot more specialized for, specific teams or specific areas of focus or whatever. And so the large one tends to be a little bit more informal, and the small ones are kind of serious business only. What the CSM does is we are basically we do kind of a unpaid consulting thing, and we do a thing, we get an opportunity to see a whole bunch of different things what CCP is doing, to give feedback on them, to raise issues. We sign an NDA, which means that CSM knows things about the game that CCP doesn't. CSM knows things about the game that CCP doesn't tell the players yet. And one of the huge advantages of that is that we can, we can hear stuff and we can give feedback on it, and we can tell CCP, this is a really bad idea. You shouldn't do this because it will make people mad, it will not work for the game, etc., etc., etc. And when CCP hears that, they usually listen. Because we've been shown to be right, partly. They don't want to, CSM and CCP are ultimately on the same team, and that's the team of making the game as good as it can be. Sometimes that just involves a certain level of friction. You'll often hear people say that CSM is the check on CCP, and that's in some ways true. I mean, the advantage of being not an employee and not, officially related to the company in any way, aside from this kind of voluntary engagement thing, is if you tell someone that their idea is bad, it's not, it's not one of their colleagues saying that. It's a lot easier to hear from the CSM sometimes, I think. And we can, we have the freedom to be critical as necessary, and the responsibility to do that as clearly and analytically as possible, which is to say, one of the advantages of the CSM is we will not run around on the internal forum saying that everything is literally incarnate. So that when we do get on the internal forums and say this is literally incarnate, it means something. That's kind of a rambling answer in terms of what kind of influence with devs do we have. As much influence as the devs will let us have. CCP doesn't have to work with the CSM. They do, though, because it gets them a much better product than it would otherwise. So we get taken seriously. And we get taken seriously by devs, by some of the other CCPers who aren't directly in development. CCP Siegel has been a huge supporter of the CSM process and the CSM project. And so that's been fantastic because we can go and talk to her and, provide high-level feedback. We've had devs, we've gotten things changed. We've gotten things added to the game. We did, we made a major push to get ship maintenance arrays fixed so they drop loot. That worked. They brought us in on the drone assist rebalance. We pushed to get damps addressed a little bit. We actually had the ability to, at one point we saw a feature and it was not very good, and we said so to CCP and it got pushed back.
Wouldn't you say that as each CSM has gotten, or let me put it this way, as more and more years have gone by with different iterations of the CSM, CCP has now recognized that the CSM can be a valuable stakeholder in the review of content. I know that you have Skype channels to CCP. You participate in a number of different forums, specifically for communicating with the devs with CCP. Do you feel that the CSM is now really fulfilling a role as stakeholders in the development process with CCP?
Yeah, that's a very, very good summary of what we're doing. We've got all these avenues of communication. We often get brought in early enough in the development process where our feedback has a meaningful impact and can prevent CCP from doing a whole bunch of extra work. And it's overall, I think that we are incredibly valuable to CCP in that way, and we are valuable to the players in the sense that if you elect people who can represent you well, you will find that the issues that you care about get addressed in this sort of quiet period before something goes out to the players.
When you ran for CSM8, as you said, it was primarily to represent new player interests, and you are continuing to do that on your platform with CSM9. But knowing what you know now, that you've been with the CSM for a year, would you have decided to run for CSM8?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I found CSM8, I'm running again because I found CSM8 an incredibly valuable experience, and I felt like I was able to do some good. I felt like I was able to help them. And knowing what I know now, I would absolutely do it all over again. I might, posting during the year, I might do that. There were a couple of times that I kind of wanted to go back and be more clear the first time around, but yeah, I would absolutely run again.
We have a couple of good follow-up questions to this. Aegis asks, what was it about being involved with CSM8 that enticed you to decide to run again for CSM9?
Probably all of the times where I was able to point to something that I did or that I said that had a measurable impact on the game. It was having CCPers ask my opinion on things, giving feedback, and being able to provide at points a completely unique point of feedback, something that nobody else was adding or nobody else had thought of, and seeing that affect the final outcome of a particular feature or change or whatever was just incredible. And all the sort of times that's happened, and all the times where I've really gotten some piece of community feedback, the one that stands out in my mind was talking about exploration at kind of an expert level. That was a big complaint about Odyssey, and I didn't understand it for a long time. And through Space Hangouts, actually, I got to a point where I understand what people are looking for, and being able to bring that back to CCP and say, this thing that I can now condense into a paragraph and put on Skype is a thing that players are worried about and needs to be addressed, and to hear that acknowledged was awesome.
You mentioned, again, new player interests, and do you think that you accomplished what you wanted to when you started running for CSM8? Do you think that you accomplished what you expected to in terms of helping and representing new player interests?
Yes and no. I definitely had a number of points where I was able to come in and say, this is how this thing interacts with a new player. This is how the thing that you're working for or you're working with will affect people who are working with new players and all that. And that was one of the reasons why I ran, so that perspective was addressed. And I feel like that went really well. In terms of pushing higher level feature things, yes and no. I mean, CCP, I think, in a lot of ways surprised me by agreeing with me on why the new player experience was not great. So I would love to work with them more to make it great, but I didn't really have to raise consciousness in the same way that I thought I would have to going in. I guess that's one of the biggest takeaways that I had from CSM8 was that CCP is smarter than I think the forums give them credit for sometimes. But, I did have a couple of points where I was able to provide feedback for NRDS groups or for other sort of smaller groups in nullsec, and that was valuable as well. So in terms of using my perspective, yes, I achieved my goal. In terms of, getting any of my high-minded features into the game, I didn't, and those should be taken as an indication of perspective and not as a campaign promise.
Bob Care Bear Rowland asks, what do you think newer players want from the game? What are they looking for or should be looking for in EVE Online?
Well, I can say what I wanted, which was I wanted an interesting game to play with my friends. I like things that are fun. I like things that are complex. I like things that are hard. EVE is certainly complex and hard. It's sometimes not always fun. People, I think, come to EVE because they like science fiction universes. They like, their friends who are already in EVE. They like the idea of flying spaceships around and going pew, 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 pew. And I think the thing that gets missed, or the thing that new players find themselves wanting, 4 weeks in, is, well, so what do I do now? And that's one of the biggest areas that CCP needs to address in the new player experience.
Ronnie Willings asks a question here. I want to break it into two parts. He says, I read that your top issues are power projection, sovereignty system, related space ownership, and the new player experience. Are those the three main issues that you were focusing on, or have we missed any?
Nope. Those are the three main issues. It's the first two are basically just how do you exist as a smaller group in space, and in particular in nullsec space, and new player issues are a thing that I still care about. I still really deeply want this game to retain everyone who could possibly be interested in it. There are always going to be some people for whom EVE Online is not their game, just as there are some people for whom WoW is not their game, or Elder Scrolls Online is not their game. But there should be as many of the people who think EVE Online could be their game as possible should be able to stay without getting turned off too early because of, well, I don't understand what's going on, and I don't know what to do next.
Let's explore each of these. Power projection. What do you think is the issue with power projection, and what would you do about it?
So the big issue with power projection is that everyone not necessarily, at least mechanically can, move their capitals across the map in a relatively short period of time. This is amplified by time dilation, which means that you have more time to get to a fight to kind of dogpile in than you would otherwise. And not everyone can practically do this. You certainly, if you look at the Goon Trail of Tears graphic from when they moved all their carriers a while back, it's like an awful 5-hour nightmare. But it's a thing that some groups can do and groups that are more practiced can do, and it's a thing that makes it easier to go from defending your space on one side of the galaxy to defending your space on another side of the galaxy without having to do a whole bunch of work and restage things and think long and hard about what you're going to take and if you can reship and all that stuff. So how to fix it? This is where it gets tricky. Some of the things that are proposed, like the Merlono Sky had this power projection points idea that works all right, but feels pretty gamey. A lot of people who say, like, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't be able to jump a particular ship too often. Well, you know, that kind of advantages larger groups, right? Because you can jump a ship and then pick up a new ship and hop into that and then jump that ship. And so you kind of, you know, pony express your carriers across the galaxy. And if you can pony express your carriers across the galaxy, then you win. If you can't, then you don't. Good game, large groups, well played. A lot of the suggestions fail to consider the value of peacetime logistics, something which makes it nigh impossible to import the necessary goods from Highsec. And I'm not talking about ships. I'm talking about moon goo and isotopes and meta modules, all stuff that you can't buy, that you can't build locally. I think it's a very admirable goal to try and have nullsec build a lot of its stuff locally, but even if you do that, you're always going to have jump freighters, you're always going to have ships bringing something in, and making logistics pilots kill themselves is not a very good design goal. So the how is a thornier question. I haven't heard a really good idea yet, but it's one I'm interested in.
What about the sovereignty system? It hasn't been really touched since Dominion. Do you think it's broken, and what would you do about it?
It absolutely is broken. I was just spending some time this morning shooting an infrastructure hub, and it was incredibly boring, and I almost fell asleep. It is the sovereignty system right now rewards grouping up into a big group with your friends. The way you contest Sov is by having more dudes than the other dudes. The way that you fight a Sov war involves making life completely miserable on both sides with AU time zone, Australia time zone timers, and just whatever else you can pull. It's a bunch of structures, it's a bunch of grinding. Even if you know, people say that Dominion gives huge advantages to the defenders, and they're not entirely wrong. Of Sound Mind was able to hold off the entire Providence block of Sound Mind and Noir, who Sound Mind had hired, were able to hold off the entire Providence block for 2 weeks. But that 2 weeks was propped up by a bunch of repping stations and iHubs in Ospreys. It was soul-crushing for everyone involved. And so it needs to be better. There's also this thing where you get kind of the victory grind, so you have a alliance that has given up and is evacuating to, say, Stain, and the entire region of Ketch is abandoned, but it has to be ground out by the Hero Coalition, station by iHub, and it's not fun, it's not interesting, and it should be a lot more vulnerable than that. So that's kind of the problem. In terms of the solution, I think the only thing that makes any sense is an activity-based system. Sovereignty should be, if someone has a system and they are completely not using it, that system should be very easy to capture. Maybe that means that you still have TCUs, you still have iHubs, you still have stations, but their hit points are incredibly reduced if you don't have any activity in the system. As activity in the system increases, as you fill it with pilots who are doing things in space, the robustness of that system should increase. I would support something that, instead of that worked in some ways like the old PAW system, not in that you have to tower all of the moons, but in that the timers are a little bit more variable, and there are maybe a couple more of them than this sort of weird 3 or 4 timer experience. If there's some way to spread pilots into multiple systems, that's ideal. If there's one of the things that would vastly help this is if there were more ways to upgrade your system so that you can fit more pilots in it, so that you can increase the activity in it. Right now, people spread out on nullsec partly because of other aspects of the system, and it is maybe a little gamey, maybe a little arbitrary, but it, especially if you're putting up more structures as your activity increases, take iHub upgrades off of the iHub and put them in space. Give them their own timers, make them like a little mini thing that you have to go through to take the system. And they offline when your activity falls below a certain amount. Those kinds of things should be correlated so that people can build themselves a citadel and a fortress in a little small area of space without needing to sprawl over a whole bunch of regions. And people who sprawl over a whole bunch of regions will find their holdings easier to disrupt, both because it's harder to defend them because they can't just hop all over the map, and because they're just physically weaker. And I think that kind of thing would do a lot for Sov. I don't like the tug-of-war sovereignty proposals as much, because those are almost universally awful for NRDS. If someone else doing activity in your system lowers your control of the system, then any neutral who's ratting in your space is actively harming you. And that is unacceptable from a gameplay standpoint. I don't like the factional warfare Sov systems because I can't imagine orbiting buttons in space being any better than shooting iHubs is. Sure, you can't blob out button orbiting in the same way. It's still not interesting, and it is very gamey, and it doesn't seem to fit the theme of how nullsec works. It's a very long answer, but there you go.
Valid point. It's a complex issue, and you've illustrated that you've obviously put a lot of thinking into it, which is useful. We've touched on the new player experience as well. Interested in any additional ideas that we haven't talked about there, but let me ask you a broader question. Do you think that EVE Online, as it currently exists, is too hostile to new players? And if so, what would you do to change that?
I don't think EVE Online, the game, is too hostile. I think, certainly there are some bitter vets who are going to be awful to newbies. There are also groups like E-UNI that are going to try and help them out. I think that the game itself has a very high barrier to entry. It's a very complex game. It's a very deep game. It's very awesome. But all of that complexity and depth is through sort of a weird oral culture where you, is transmitted through a weird oral culture where the only way that you learn about so many different mechanics in the game is by going to classes or by talking to someone or, getting in a corp. And while that social aspect is great, I think it makes retaining new players much more widely variable, because you have new players who find those groups, who stick, and you have new players who can manage to look stuff up on Google and figure it out. But then you have a vast majority of players who don't necessarily get kind of, this is going to sound a little creepy, but like indoctrinated into the culture, and who end up kind of doing their own thing and mining and missioning and not really doing very much else. I have nothing against mining and missioning for people who find them fun, but I think there are people who kind of do that because that's what you do in an MMO, and that's what you do in the tutorial, and you get the biggest, most pimp missioning boat you can, because obviously you should upgrade all of your gear as much as possible and put all the shinies on it. People don't necessarily know the big thing about EVE, which is that your ships are disposable. Your ships are consumables. You may try harder not to lose your Dreadnought versus your Atron, but eventually you will lose your Dreadnought. And you don't generally buy a dread unless you're prepared to see that, at least not if you've people. And that kind of barrier to entry is, I think, one of the largest challenges that's facing CCP today. And there are some things that they could do to deal with it. We talked in the winter minutes a little bit about kind of like quasi-achievement systems or whatever. That if the tutorial were opened up a little bit and covered more things. I wrote an article last year about, and I'm still really interested in, having the tutorial take you through experiences like unexpectedly losing your ship in PvP. It tells you to expect to lose your ship, which is very nice, but usually when I lost my ship, no one came up and tapped me on the shoulder and said, Ali, you might want to dock and refit into something you care less about. And preparing people for that kind of emotional shock is something that will I think help people succeed in EVE, as well as just kind of going from. I saw a really good idea for sort of changing level 1 through level 4 missions to make them more like where level 1 missions are missions where you get all the level 4 missions, which are more lucrative, are missions where you kind of get a target and you have to scout and figure it out yourself. And I think that kind of thing would do wonders for the game in terms of helping teach people how to think like an EVE player.
Would you say that EVE Online has developed a reputation for less than sociable activity? I mean, for example, the biggest publicity that CCP seems to get is when something like an Erotica 1 controversy happens, or when someone scams somebody out or steals an entire corporation or causes their alliance to collapse. Do you think that is over-cultivated? And if so, what would you do to change that?
I'm going to disagree with some of your premise. I think the largest publicity I've seen in my time playing EVE has been Bitakar and Asakai, both of which were large nullsec fights, where actually they were large nullsec fights where no metagaming even happened. Well, I say no metagaming. I mean, I'm sure everyone had spies in every fleet, but they weren't kicked off by spies. One was kicked off by a jump instead of bridge, and the other was kicked off by, whoops, I accidentally the alliance wallet. So, I would disagree that that's the only thing that EVE gets a reputation for. I would say that, yeah, there's the joke is one of the Steam tags for EVE is Sociopath Simulator Online. I think the fact that EVE Online lets people explore the darker aspects of human interaction, where you're playing not just, you're not just PvPing in the sense of, well, my guns can shoot your shields, but you're PvPing in the sense of you're trying to outwit other pilots, and you're trying to prevent yourself from getting got by something else, or by someone else. I think that's one of the more unique and interesting aspects of EVE Online. And so while I'm happy that CCP took a stand against using that kind of a thing as social cover for being a total asshole, I don't think that there's anything necessarily else that needs to be done on that front. And I think that sort of seedy criminal underbelly is one of the interesting things that be prepared for coming into the game.
I was listening to one of your interviews that was done with one of the EVE Online podcasts, and they asked you what candidates you liked for CSM 9. You mentioned Psychotic Monk, who's known as a pirate and ganker in Highsec. How do you rationalize that against the support that you supposedly provide or want to engender for the new player experience?
certainly new players come in and become pirates and gankers. It's, there are people who... That's a valid career path in the game. And it's something that new players should have to deal with. Not should have to deal with. That was poorly phrased. It's something that new players should be prepared to deal with. It's something that, I think the tutorial could do more to prepare people to deal with. And sort of the introduction to the game. Like I say, it's about indoctrinating people into EVE's culture. And certainly some of the new players will come in and will do piracy, ganging, stealing, AWOXing, all that stuff. Psychotic Monk has introduced a whole bunch of new players into the game and done, mentored them into becoming stealing, briefing scumbags. That's a thing that people do. I don't think there's any conflict between those two.
Fair enough. That's a good answer. What do you think was the biggest success for CSM 8, and what do you think was the biggest shortcoming, at least so far?
Shortcoming, possibly either the Summer Blink situation or the Winter Minute or Summer Minute situation. Summer Minute situation was a lot more CCP. Summer Blink thing was a lot more. We could have, handled that a little bit differently, and it might have been better. Largest success. I think probably I'm still going to go with SMA Loot Drop. It happened a little bit. It happened a little while ago, but we convinced CCP to take this bug from the back burner and put it on the schedule to be released in the Rubicon expansion. They had it as something that they wanted to deal with someday, and we made a very convincing argument for why they had to deal with it now. And one of the teams picked it up and got it done. That was a very, very, very good example of the system working.
What about something like the ESS? When it was released, some people thought that was not shall we say, not a perfect design. What's your opinion about what the CSM could have done or might have done to make that better?
So CCP Dolan actually came on Declarations of War very recently. If you listen to our most recent episode, I'm a co-host there. You'll hear it. And he told the full story of the ESS, which may explain some things. It was when we initially saw it at the Summer Summit, it was a great deal worse than it was when it initially came out. When we saw it at the Summer Summit, it was so bad that we ended up asking CCP to push it back. And to their great credit, they did. And they listened to us, and they addressed a lot of the issues in the initial release. But we, partly as a result of that, ended up missing some of the other issues that the community brought up when it was initially posted to the community. We did, and especially I did, turn around and condense the community feedback into short, high-quality feedback for CCP, and a lot of the issues that people had with it got fixed, and it's now a successful working feature, which is light years ahead of both where it was when it was announced and where it was introduced to the CSM.
Very good. So basically, go listen to that Declarations of War podcast recording. Do you happen to know which one that was?
It's the most recent, number 72.
Number 72. Very good. Ronnie Wellings asked a follow-up question here, and I think we've talked a little bit about Psychotic Monk, but maybe you'll give a different answer. Can you give us your top 3 voting picks of other candidates for CSM 9 that you would like to serve with, and explain why?
I have a lot more than 3 top candidates that I want to serve with. This is a really, really, really strong field. Sion Aviander is one of my court mates. He's running for CSM as well, on more of a PvP and small gang and Bark focused thing. I'm supporting him. Sugar Kyle is a candidate that a lot of you should have on your ballots. She's a low-sec candidate who's got a very wide range of low-sec experiences. As much as I think CSM 8 was a good run, we didn't have a low-sec candidate, or we didn't have a low-sec member, and that was a perspective that we missed. Sugar Kyle has a really good perspective and has been running a good campaign and has done some good interviews and some good posts on the forums, and her blog is good reading. Basically, I really hope she makes it in. She was at the top of my ballot. And Psychotic Monk, I've already talked about, so I'll skip over him this time, and I will instead push Jane Fillon, who's one of the leaders of Spectre Fleet, and one of my colleagues and friends. He's a very good theory crafter and numbers nerd, and he's got a lot of the FC perspective. And in particular, he's got the perspective of an FC community leader in a group which is, it's not necessarily it's an NPSI group. It's not necessarily a small group in the sense that I tend to think about, which is to say a small corporate alliance. But they're certainly engaging in PvP and engaging in PvP and nullsec outside of the big fleet meta, which is very interesting and a very good perspective.
You mentioned there might be other candidates. What would be your second tier of other candidates that you would recommend?
So this is not my second tier yet. These are the candidates. So I wrote a blog post about this. These are the candidates that I left off of that list because you may already know them. Mina is one of the best members of CSM8. He's another numbers guy. He's offered incredibly insightful, constructive, and valuable feedback on nearly every proposal that CCP has brought us, and he's had a really great effect on the game. I know a lot of people sort of look at him and go, oh, he's the GIN candidate, but he's been fairly apolitical and overall just one of the standout members of CSM8. Mike Azariah, also a fantastic CSM8 alum. He's been providing the Highsec Care Bear perspective. I saw someone in the channel asked, and I hope we get to it, what my feelings and sort of Highsec representation are. I'm very interested in Highsec and very interested in it being a valuable and interesting area of space. Mike Azariah lives that, and that's his perspective that he's brought, and that has been, he's been another candidate looking after new players and sort of casual players, the people who log on and don't say that they spend 10 to 20 hours on EVA Week, which is a good group to have talking to CCP, because you usually get on the CSM the people who are most involved and care the most and all that, and that can lead to you having kind of this weird effect where the only people that you have are like top of the game FCs and years long veteran players, and both me and Mike sort of broke out of that mold. Xander Fina, many people will know him from Crossing Zebras podcast. I'm a process person, which means that I tend to be kind of I'm a process person, which means that I tend to be kind of quiet and more calm. Xander obviously is a little bit louder, and I think that personality types is quite valuable. He's a great community representative. He's been doing good stuff over at Crossing Zebras as a podcast and as a interesting features. And he's already promised to bring that to CSM 9 to help CSM 9 communicate and get stuff back out to the players, which is just fantastic. So that sort of rounds out my top tier. And then I have a couple of other people who are sort of in the, also good. I found the field for CSM 9 intimidating to put together just a 14-person ballot.
I agree. It's a very strong field. I remember your article from your blog. For people who are listening to this in a recording, and for those who are listening in now, where can they find that? What is the name of your blog, and what is the address?
The name of my blog is Internet Space Misadventures. It's sort of very sporadically updated, and it can be found at warp-2-sun.tumblr.com. I'll also cross-post things from there to Twitter, where I'm much more active as at Ali_of_space.
Very good. And thanks, Mangala, for posting that link in chat. Appreciate that. You touched on some of the issues a little bit here that Ronnie brings up about Highsec issues. Tell us a little bit more. You mentioned that you had an interest in that. You have talked a lot about, though, things that relate specifically to null or low sec. So what Highsec issues are you interested in, and what would you like to see the CSM and CCP do with Highsec in the coming year?
So Highsec suffers from this idea where a bunch of people look at it and they say, oh, that's the starting zone. It's the kiddie pool. Because of Concord, because it's got, some of the lowest value anomalies and stuff. I'm going to close my window where people are apparently doing construction outside. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem. I can hum while we wait for Rally to come back. Or sing.
I'm back.
Oh, too bad. I was about to sing, but go right ahead.
It's a gorgeous day outside, so I've had the window open all afternoon. But yeah, so Highsec suffers from being considered kind of the starter zone, and it really shouldn't be. It's got to have its own thing, which is separates it from low sec, which separates it from null sec. I think a lot of that is one of the biggest things of that is the freedom of travel in Highsec, and also the fact that there are so many NPCs and different NPC stories there. For someone who actually wants to live and work with the empires, which is, an interesting part of the sandbox as well, or can be, Highsec's the only place to do that. So things that I'd like CCP to do with Highsec is to look at it and think about what people can build there in terms of organizations, and in terms of kind of creating a home for themselves, because you can carve out a home for yourself in nullsec, obviously by putting up a banner that says, this is our nullsec system. You can do it in lowsec and NPC nullsec somewhat by just kind of controlling the station and shooting all comers. In Highsec, you really ought to have more ways to build up the space you're in to make it more valuable, to build relationships with the NPCs that you live with. Basically, I'm interested in adding things to Highsec that would make it a more deep experience, and in particular, a more deeply social experience, so that you don't have people who fly with groups necessarily feeling like they're forced out to low-sec or forced out to null-sec in order to do the stuff that they find interesting.
Fair enough. Couple of things coming up here with CSM 9. First of all, what do you think the biggest challenges are going to be in the coming year for CSM 9 and for EVE Online, the game in general?
For EVE Online, the game, I think that we're hitting the point where CCP are going to be taking on larger projects, or should be taking on larger projects, and that's something which CCP is, especially for bigger things, they can either come out fantastic or they can come out a nightmare. Dominion Sov is a really good example of that. So there's going to be that. In terms of CSM 9, I hope CSM 9 will be the year where we figure out more how to bring CCP or how to bring CSM to the players who aren't as deeply involved in the metagame. I don't want to have as many conversations this time next year that start with, no, actually, I don't know what a CSM is.
Do you anticipate that the voting this year will be less? There seems to be less controversy that has happened over the last year, so that as a result might mean a lower motivated voting base. Do you agree with that?
It's hard to get less than the controversy that started, CSM, between CSM over CSM 7's term. I think the voting will probably be in a lot of ways similar in number to the voting for CSM 8. I think that if we see that voting is up a little bit, that's encouraging. That's similar to the same. I think if we see that voting is down a little bit, that's discouraging. That means that we need to focus even more on getting everyday, ordinary players engaged in the CSM process and trying to learn why they're not. Because, I said this to CCP Dolan as well. It's true that years where there's a lot of controversy drive CSM participation because people see it as this really important thing where, they can help their guy get and win out against the other guy, and the other guy is bad and their guy is good. But that level of passion and engagement should be something that is evident in other times as well. And even without a controversy, we should be able to present things in a way that is more interesting than reading 40 pages of the dry proceedings of many hours spent in a conference room.
Very good. A few questions just to get to know or help illustrate who you are. What's your most favorite thing to do in EVE Online, and what's your least favorite thing to do in EVE Online?
Least favorite thing to do, hands down, structure grinds. I really need to get myself a laser ship or a drone ship. Those are the two ships, the two weapons which I have the worst skills in, though. Because, even if you're doing it in bombers, it's just every, couple of minutes you have to push a button. And that's literally all the engagement, that's pushing a button and, trying to do other things. Most fun thing on EVE Online, probably recently the solo PvP thing. Either that or Black Ops Hunter Killing, which is in a lot of ways similar, except that instead of, honorable 1v1s, the end of it is like 18 bombers falling on someone's poor mission ship.
I didn't hear you mention very much, in fact, nothing so far about PvE activities, exploration, mining, missioning. Do you ever do
thank
any
you for
PvE?
Reminding me. Yes, I do. Thank you for reminding me about exploration. Exploration tends to be the way that I get my money. I find relic sites rather profitable. I've done some wormhole PvE, not as much recently. I don't really mine or mission. And since moving out of Soft Nullsec, I don't do anoms as much. I used to really enjoy running those, actually. I would pick a ship and try and tweak it and optimize it and test it out against as many different anoms as possible. I tend to be someone who tries to make that engaging without, going necessarily for the highest ISK per hour. And that's paid off in PvP as well. But I do enjoy exploration. I do a lot of that, and that tends to be my primary PvE activity.
Do you think CCP should invest in improving or revamping PvE in some way?
Absolutely, for several reasons. I actually put that on the vote match as one of my highest priorities, because PvE is the thing that everyone does in between PvP. Even if you look at EVE and even if you say, oh, this is a PvP game, you're not PvPing 24/7, and even if you are, usually you have to get money from somewhere. And that somewhere should be interesting, engaging, fun, worth doing. People who PvE often provide targets for people who PvP. It's the classic problem of getting people out in space doing things. And if the PvE is better, more people are out in space doing things. If the PvE were closer to, and there's two other goals that could be met by revamping PvE. Is if the PvE were closer to PvP, in the sense that, right now the optimal ship to run anomalies in Garista space in an active sense is maybe a Ham Tengu that has very specialized mid slots, very specialized hardeners, a huge EM hole, but like 90% thermal resist, and a particular setup that's really tuned just for those particular anomalies. If that ship were fit in more of a way that could be used for PvP, and if fitting it that way were not suboptimal in terms of making money in PvE, I think that it would improve the game dramatically, because then for things like the ESS, where you have raiders who are coming in and disrupting PvE, and defenders who are, in theory, supposed to push them off, it'd be a lot easier to push people off or fight back in a PvE sense if the ship you were in was worth anything for fighting back. And that would have more content and provide more value to people who are interested in a mix of PvE and lifestyles. The ESS is the encounter surveillance system. It's a nullsec deployable that increases the amount of money you can earn for ratting at the expense of some of that money is locked in a structure that other people can steal. So changing PvE would help that a lot. CCP to introduce more complex PvE in both Highsec and nullsec. Highsec where it would be more interesting, and nullsec where it would allow people to group up and run sites together inside of a system, which would make systems more active and would again make it easier for people to sort of do things together with each other. And same thing goes for Highsec even.
And we haven't seen any iterations really to PvE content since the incursions. Of course, there's been some hints about things like ring mining, which can be done in groups. I know you can't say anything about any details that CCP may have shared with us, but do you think that more group-oriented PvE would be a direction that you would expect us to see, or that let me put it this way. Do you think that's something that the CSM would promote in the coming year?
Yeah, for me as someone, I also have a bit of the casual player in me, and so it's important that there's both group and solo options. One of the reasons as much as I love wormhole space, one of the reasons I don't actually fly there is because, or at least don't fly there primarily, is because I can't deal with being unable to solo anything ever again. So it's absolutely something I'd push. It's also absolutely something that I think CCP should mix with the other thing. There was, in terms of iterations on PvE, I'm looking at the Winter Minutes, Session 16, Team Space Glitter, and it talks about a team which has been formed to develop content tools within CCP, which is to say tools to create NPCs and PvE content, and make it easier to add NPCs and, tweak PvE stuff and all that. Doesn't touch the rat AI, but does touch the basic building a new PvE site problem.
Good reference, thanks. Are you playing any other games other than EVE Online currently?
I play a lot of Don't Starve. I'm very bad at it. I starve a lot. I often die in other circumstances. I used to play League of Legends, but I haven't done that as recently. I'm looking forward to Mirror's Edge 2 when that comes out. But EVE gets the lion's share of my affections as a game.
Which is your favorite? Robots, pirates, or ninjas?
Pirates.
And why?
I don't know. It's more interesting sailing around. I feel like the lore around pirates is a lot more fleshed out than the lore around robots or the lore around ninjas. Like, ninjas, they only really get brought up when you're talking about sneaking into someone's house and doing stuff. I love playing sneaky rogue type of characters. I guess I'm playing the Pathfinder adventure card game, not that it's a computer game. And I'm currently playing as Mauricio, the rogue who runs around and disables traps and stuff like that. It's a ton of fun. But that's kind of just like in that one moment where they really get talked about. And then robots, similarly, either they're invading and taking over humanity and they look like us now, or I don't know. So pirates, because they have a more fleshed out and interesting story behind them.
Very good. Star Trek, Star Wars, or Firefly?
Firefly, probably.
Okay, why?
Again with the more interesting story. I think if I had to, it was a good show. It was well written. It was well acted. There were interesting stories in it. I have watched all of Star Trek Voyager and some of the other Star Treks, and I feel like there are some good stories there, but it also got kind of repetitive. And then Star Wars I like, but I don't love. I can't really say why other than just taste.
Ali, we have a lot of new players here in EVE Online.
It's all taste, though.
Well, of course. Naturally. We have a lot of new players here in EVE University, and so what advice would you give people that are brand new to the game? What lessons would you learn from your own experience that you would want to pass on to them?
Definitely train exploration skills, because you can use those either for exploration, which will make you tons of dough, or ninja salvaging, which will also make you tons of dough. Definitely also, I think the biggest piece of advice I would give new players is if someone says you can't do something, your first thought should be to not believe them, because in general, new players can do a lot more things in EVE Online than bitter vets tend to think that they can do. Witness again those people who are like, oh, you have to dock up and train skills for 6 months before you can do anything. Nah, you can have fun in a month. And the other piece of advice that I would give really everyone playing EVE Online, but new players in particular, if you find something and you say, this isn't for me, I'm not really having fun, maybe I'll quit, this isn't enjoyable anymore, try something new. Try something you haven't done yet. Just completely mix it up, because you will probably be surprised to find that there's something else which is interesting and fun to do out there.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. Any final words before we sign off and close this out that you'd like to make sure you transmit to this audience?
Definitely vote for CSM. Vote in the CSM9 elections. Vote Ali Aras for CSM, obviously. I would love to have a place on your ballot as close to the top as possible. But even if you're not going to vote for me, vote, because the CSM is important. We represent the players to CCP. We represent you to CCP. And we do have an effect on the game. So vote. Tell your friends to vote. Tell your friends what the CSM is. You send out, convo them off your contacts list, send them EVE mails, do whatever you have to do, just even if it's a little bit annoying. Make sure your friends have voted, make sure they tell their friends to vote, etc. Because the way that we get the absolute best, most representative, most interesting council is to have as many people voting as possible.
Ali, are you planning to go to FanFest this year?
Yep, I'm going to be there. I arrive Sunday morning. I'm going to be there until Saturday afternoon. I am going to miss the party because my younger sister is graduating from college, and so I absolutely have to get back to the United States to support her.
Well, that's too bad. I will be there. If I see you, please remind me. I will be happy to purchase the beverage of your choice. And thanks to being here today and for all the things that you do for Eve University.
Well, thank you. Same goes to you. And I'm sure I will undoubtedly run into a million people.
Ali, thanks for joining us today. Very much appreciate it. Folks, we are going to be posting the recording of this in our recorded class library, so you can go back and listen to it and share it with your friends. Ali, once again, thank you for joining. We very much appreciate it. And you're always welcome, of course, to join us on our Mumble Chat in Eve University. And also, I'd like to encourage you, once again, if you could do another stealth bomber class or two. I know they're very popular. I would be in your debt.
Absolutely. And if I don't know if you guys do any Black Ops classes, but those are cool too.
You know what? It's an area we don't cover nearly enough. I'll be in touch. Maybe we can organize something.
Yeah, that sounds good. I actually have enough characters to run one now.
And as always, you are welcome to hang out on our standard Mumble server.
Thanks for the reminder. I'll definitely do that more.
Thanks, everyone. And Ali, once again, thank you. And with that, I think we'll close this out. And be sure to go vote for CSM 9. In fact, you should do it right now. Do not delay if you have not voted already. So it's very important, and it is an opportunity for all of you to make sure that your interests are represented as CCP works with developing and improving the game. So let me reiterate what Ali's already said. So with that, we'll say good luck, everyone. Thank you, and fly safe.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon.